Hi, I'm Debony Morgan, a licensed marriage and family therapist. Welcome to Intersections, where we talk about the intersections of LGBTQ, sex, faith, and art. Today, we're going to be talking with the whiskey preacher, Phil Shepherd, and we're going to be putting together the issues of LGBTQ and faith. So, Phil, would you tell us a little bit more about your qualifications on the subject?
Stephanie, thank you so much for having me on here. I'm really honored to be on Intersections. My name is Phil Shepherd, aka the Whiskey Preacher, and I'm a co-founding pastor of the Eucatastrophe, which is an emergent missional church here in downtown Fort Worth. And I happen to be a blogger for the Huffington Post as well as Pathos, and I talk a lot about, in my articles that I write, about LGBTQ equality, especially within the denomination that I function in, which is the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
Mm-hmm. Great, and we're really excited to have you here too. I'm really happy to be talking to you. So, Phil, tell us first, what exactly is the definition of the emerging church, the emergent church, or the missionary church? How is that different than the churches down the street from me in Atlanta?
Well, the church down the street from you in Atlanta could be an emergent missional church. It's not, it doesn't look or feel just one way.
Hmm.
I would say, especially when I get to teach, every once in a while they let me come in and mess with the PhD students and the students at the seminary here in Fort Worth, not Southwestern, which is a Southern Baptist seminary. Not that I have anything wrong against Southern Baptists. I used to be one. They just won't ever let me into their seminary. Bright is a TCU seminary. Anyway, when I get asked this question in the classroom, the best way I know how to define it is that it's very contextual. It
Hmm.
is um, trying to quote Doug Pagitt, who is a big voice within the emergent missional church. He once said that the church as a whole has substituted unity for uniformity. We
Mm.
stopped asking the question, what does church look like within my own context? We think like Willow Creek or Saddleback, some of these more larger megachurch successful churches within Chicago and in California, and we see these things and we try to replicate it because we think that that will work. Well, we've tried so hard within the church world uh, to make this rubric of numbers and create these
Hmm. Hmm.
benchmarks that my church is only successful if I have these many people. My church is
Right.
only successful if I have this much money in the tithing plate. And
It's almost a consumer mindset, right?
exactly, yes. And so there are a whole bunch of us all around the world. It's just not a Western Christianity conversation. It has different names all over the world.
Hmm.
In the UK, it's called alt worship. But you have these folks who are having these conversations, finding out what church looks like in their context. Not only what does it mean to be church in downtown Fort Worth in my context, but what does it mean to be a church in the 21st century in downtown?
Right.
And so, and as far as the missional part of that question, a lot of people, when they hear missional, they think social justice.
Right.
And that is a key component of that, but it is not all of it. It's more of a posture of being about something else than just being a consumer, about local and global issues, about
Hmm.
bringing the good news and being the good news of Jesus or Muhammad, depending on, or Buddha, or any name that you want to put to God. But having this posture of how can I make a difference, bringing that good news into my own context as well as a global context. I don't know if that muddies the water or not. You're going to hear, if you asked five different people that same question, we're all going to give you five different answers.
Yeah, but I think it's important that you pointed out the ecumenical portion of it.
Yeah,
That it's more about, in my mind, it's more about making connections rather than creating boundaries and
Yeah.
saying, it's almost the cliquish thing of we're the cool kids, and
Well, and
if
this
you're not one of us, we're
conversation,
not
the
interested.
conversation is just not limited to Christianity, too. I
Right,
know,
exactly.
there are, take for instance, Pathos, the place. It's an interfaith website that people can go in and find progressive religious conversations, progressive spirituality conversations. But it's just not a Christian progressive conversation. They
Hmm.
have a progressive Muslim, what they call portals. They have a progressive Buddhist, they have a progressive pagan, they have a progressive evangelical. And just to open up the conversation of people having a more global conversation about the contexts in which they're living out their good news.
Right.
If that makes any
And
sense
that's
whatsoever.
progressive in and of itself,
Yeah,
to bring that all together in one place
yeah,
and not have it disparate.
yeah.
Yeah. So did you start off like this? You'd mentioned growing up Southern Baptist. What's the story there?
I was raised Southern Baptist in Anchorage, Alaska. I was born and raised in Anchorage, and I happened to, I was in the church my second week of life.
Wow.
There's a picture that my parents have of me on my first day at church, and I'm all wrapped up in my grandfather's arms in my Winnie the Pooh blanket, and that was my first church experience. And I was originally ordained through the Southern Baptist. And I'm entering my 19th year of vocational ministry of some sort of ministry.
Okay.
And I started out doing ministry as a Southern Baptist. And as I continued my education and I continued my pastoral experiences, I realized A, I didn't have all the answers, and B, that life is a hell of a lot more than a black and white answer
Yeah.
or a black and white conversation.
Yeah.
I don't even like the term living in the gray. I like the idea of living outside the gray. I have this video series of I call Living Outside the Gray, and um, it's asking the question, what does life look like living in color? And
Wow.
trying to find a different way to engage the world and engage God in
Yeah.
the world, at least for me.
Yeah. And that's a lot of what we're doing in the living school is the black and white idea would be dualistic thinking.
Hmm.
And then the idea of how do you move beyond that? Like what is beyond that? And I've never heard anyone say what you just said. Like it's right. It's not even the gray. It's the color. And I just love that.
It was a creepy dream that I had about 15 years ago. That's where I came up with that term. And I don't want to freak your listeners or watchers or even my listeners and watchers about that story, but let's just say it was really creepy. And it was this whole idea of trying to find life not in a black and white conversation or even in a gray conversation, because those are still the parameters that are set up that everybody seems for a long time has functioned
Hmm.
into, and I'm just not interested in that anymore.
Exactly.
And I don't think that makes me or you or anybody else better. I just think it's different, and not just for
Right.
being different sake, but just because I think that is the DNA in which that God created me.
Right. Well, and the idea of even when we think in terms of better, that's automatically dualistic, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because in order to have differentiation like that, better you have to have something black and something white. So, Phil, let me just get to the question that we're here for. Do queers belong in church?
I would say absolutely. Not only do queers belong in church, I don't think that should even be a question for the church anymore. I
Mm.
think it's really important that we acknowledge the fact that we are made not only a good creation, but a really good creation. The
Hmm.
Genesis narrative speaks into that, and as far as I can tell, and all the study that I've done over the years, God never has recanted that. So, when I started wrestling with that idea, I started wrestling, well, then what is this conversation we keep butting our heads against about whether queer should be in the church? And that's how my brain works. I go from this to this
Mm-hmm.
question.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in seminary, I'll never forget. Um, I remember I was in a scriptures class. It was the last New Testament class that I had to take for seminary, and I had already known that in the Old Testament, when the scripture talks about, especially in the Levitical laws, talking about quote unquote homosexuality,
Mm-hmm.
it has nothing to do with homosexuality of today.
Mm-hmm.
It was about Jewish men spilling their seed or wasting their seed
Yeah.
and not impregnating a woman. So they thought, you know, if you didn't have the purpose of creating an offspring, it was a sin.
Right. Just like sleeping with a woman when she's on her period.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I fast forward to the scriptures class, and I remember my professor saying, who, by the way, is a brilliant man, very conservative on this subject, but he reads a Greek Bible because he doesn't trust English translations. I mean, he's fluent in ancient Greek.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember him saying, well, the homosexuality, even in the New Testament, especially in this passage, and I can't remember exactly which one we were hitting that day, because that became a side point to me, because I had all these, not revelations, but just everything I had known about the subject was challenged at this moment when he said this. He said, the homosexuality that we're even dealing with in the New Testament has nothing to do with what we're dealing with today. This
Right.
is an issue of the aristocracy who are a part of the new church, the followers of the way, coming in and being elders and leaders within the church and then going back home and abusing sexually their male and their male
Right.
servants,
Right.
boys and men.
Right.
And Paul was really challenging them on the fact that that is not living into the love of Christ.
Right.
And that just blew my world up. And so I raised my hand and I said, so you're trying to tell me that the homosexuality in the Old Testament is dealing with a man wasting his seed, and this has to do with sexual abuse. That's correct. And you still think homosexuality today is wrong? Yes. And I said, I'm not buying that anymore. That's bullshit. And so
Yeah.
from that day on, and I tell you what, it was revolutionary to me, not only because of it changed my theology and turned it upside down, but the relationships that came from that has been second to none. And
Mm.
it's not like I went around waving a rainbow flag saying I'm queer inclusive. I told one person, and he was my best friend in seminary, and he came to the same conclusion as I did. And I kid you not, that week, literally, I think it was 2 days later, I started having friends come out to me.
Mm.
I didn't even have this conversation with them. They, for some reason, felt that I was safe, or that they needed somebody, a ministerial type person to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
And at Baylor, I had the opportunity, and my friend Lance, we both had the opportunity to really just love on folks within the queer community at Baylor for about a year and a half, and it was an honor. And I say that not tritely either, because not only did, again, I can't put enough emphasis on how it changed my life and enriched my life, but it truly just was an honor to be a part of these people's lives
Yeah.
and them not be afraid, having a safe place to say, I don't know what I feel about this, but all I know is that I'm attracted to men and I'm a dude, or I'm attracted to girls and I'm a girl,
Yeah.
and no, I wasn't sexually abused when I was a kid. Because that's
Right.
how a lot of, at least in the world that I grew up in, that's how a lot of us justified. Nobody would, ever be born. God would never create somebody with the urges to have a same-sex attraction. There has to be something that happened,
Right.
some type of sexual abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, some type of abuse. And that was a patsy for us because we did not want to tackle the subject that, well, yeah, God, I truly believe God makes us the way we are.
Mm-hmm.
And that God creates gay people.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's wrong. I don't think that's a sin. And so obviously, coming to that conclusion, my role as a Baptist were numbered because that's not a very um, popular thing to say. However, I will say this: there are some amazing Baptists out there that are queer inclusive. That I later found out, like the Baptist Alliance. There's some
Mm-hmm.
independent Baptists. I've become good friends with a pastor who was a pastor in West Texas almost 30 years ago, and he pastored the first open and affirming Baptist church in the state of Texas, in the middle of
Wow.
nowhere, West Texas.
Wow.
And that was because they had some folks that their family members were being affected by, the second onslaught of the AIDS epidemic in the mid to late 80s. And
Mm.
so it was a natural progression for them. So,
Yeah.
not that I'm trying to defend Baptists, but they're not all Pat Robinson. They're
Yeah.
not, they're
Well,
not,
and you have several American Baptist churches.
yeah,
Oakhurst, specifically over in near Decatur, is very, very open and affirming. And as a matter of fact, they're leading a marriage equality task force here in Atlanta. So,
I
yeah, we got to
didn't,
give a shout out to some of the Baptists.
yeah. On any of you who are watching this that are in the Northwest area, Seattle, Portland, Bellevue-ish, and uh, I want to give a shout out to Mindy Mitchell. She is an American Baptist pastor who's very queer inclusive, and her husband is a Disciples of Christ minister, like I am, and who's also very queer inclusive. And they're doing some amazing things up there, trying to mend the bridges of what the institutional church has done, specifically in the Northwest.
Yeah.
So they're doing some amazing things.
So I know that we can't always read somebody else's mind, but trying to have a deeper comprehension, why do you think that the traditional church to this so tightly, this exclusion of gay people?
Because I think some of them will actually have to admit that they're gay themselves.
As a psychologist, I have to agree with that.
That is just me being blunt and shooting from the hip. Um,
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who have lived in the closet for a long time, and for me, I was one of those homophobic people who didn't tolerate or love people who love somebody of the same sex.
Mm-hmm.
This is another pivotal conversation that I had. This was actually when I was in high school. I was junior or senior in high school. I had this friend named Christy, and she told me one day we were in newspaper together. I was a part of the school newspaper, and she said, Phil, you're one of the most loving, giving people I've ever met in my entire life, except when it comes to homosexuality. And then she named a
Really?
friend of ours that I don't want to mention his name because I've never actually had to got that chance to have this conversation to say sorry that I was an asshole to you.
Yeah.
But she mentioned his name, and I was friends with him, but when it came towards his sexuality, I was the biggest jerk. And she said,
Um,
that's got to change. And I'll never forget that conversation. I mean, I was
mm,
like 17, and that one conversation led me up, 20 years later to where I am today.
wow.
And so anybody who says that what you do in high school has no merit in life, well, I'm going to challenge that because at least it did in me.
Yeah.
And
Definitely myself too.
yeah,
Definitely.
a friend of mine who had enough courage to stand up to me.
Yeah. So, shifting a little bit, am I correct in remembering that at your church you've got about a third of the membership are gay? Is that about right?
Yeah, we really don't do membership, but I would say probably, I think that would probably be a fair guesstimate. One of our co-pastors, she's openly queer, and she was my intern for about a year, and it was just a natural progression when she graduated seminary that she would come and be on staff at the Eucatastrophe. And thanks to her and Stephanie, who is my partner in life and my co-pastor who helped start the Eucatastrophe, those two have taken the reins and allowed me to take a break and do some more creative stuff that I've been wanting to do, like this interview and do some writing
Mm-hmm.
projects and things like that. So, um, yeah, when we blueprinted the Eucatastrophe, there was two things that we said that were non-negotiables, and this is just Stephanie and I talking. We said women in ministry, just
Mm-hmm.
because we are in the buckle of the Bible Belt, and it's still a very patriarchal system here. And
Surprise, surprise.
surprise, surprise, and the LGBTQ conversation. One of our founding people, she was openly gay. She was one of those people within the first week when I had decided to not think that homosexuality was a sin anymore. She was one of the
Mhm.
first people that came out to me a week
Oh,
later.
wow.
And
Great.
we said we really wanted to try to challenge and change how people saw church, honestly, especially
Right.
in this area. Fortunately, there's other missional emergent communities and that are having this conversation now. But at the time, there was maybe one of us, at least in the Fort Worth area, maybe two.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Phil. Knowing that you base the church on equality and inclusivity, what does a church look like when those are your principles?
I'll go back to a conversation that I had in my seminary time, which again was a very formative time for me. I remember one of my friends who came out to me in the following weeks when I decided that being queer was not a sin.
Hmm.
She told me this. She said, I don't want to go to a gay church.
Hmm.
I, I don't want to go to a gay church. I just want to go to church, worship God with my friends and family, whether they're gay, straight, curious, transgender. I just want to be able to go to church and it not be a
Hmm.
straight church or a queer church. It's just church. And so that was very much and still is a part of our ethos when we created the Eucatastrophe. It is a challenge at times because people come in sometimes to our community thinking that we're doing an outreach to the queer community, and when
Hmm.
they find out, no, no, this is just, we're not a straight church, we're not a queer church, we're just a community of people trying to journey together. That confuses some people, especially here, again, in the
Yeah.
buckle of the Bible Belt, that people sometimes just don't get that. It's helped since Becky has come on to staff, and she is our open and very open um, lesbian co-pastor, and her partner, and they have a kid who is a part of the community as well. You know, it has helped people realize that this is not some type of bait and switch, some type of ploy to get people within the queer community to come into our church. That no, this is just who we are. And some people within
Yeah.
the LGBTQ community don't quite understand that either, because we're not a gay church either.
Yeah.
And um, I had a conversation a couple of years ago with some of the folks from the Metropolitan Church, and they were talking to me about possibly doing some consulting with them, because over in Europe, they're not considered the gay church.
Really?
No, they are more queer and straight and just a little bit of everybody. Obviously, over here in the U.S. and in Canada, they are very much known as the gay church, and
Right.
they've slowly wanted to change that image on a national level. They wanted to do that, and uh, you'll find, don't ask me a question unless you want an answer, and sometimes it's not something that you want to hear. And so when they ask me, when you think of the Metropolitan Church, what do you think of? And they just asked me to answer it without really any thought. And my first response was, you put on Jesus Christ Superstar every year in drag and do it really poorly, and you're exclusive to straight people. And they had no idea what to do with that conversation. They had no
Wow.
idea that they just all sat back and took a deep breath and eventually admitted, yeah, there's some truth to that. And mind you, I'm not very versed in the metropolitan community churches. I mean, I have friends that have been a part. I know some ministers here locally that they're doing some great, phenomenal things. But in my short relationship with them, and that is what I've been known. I mean, I think they, and this is not going to be very popular, but I think they are just as guilty of creating
Hmm.
exclusivity than the evangelical straight church. And
Yeah.
that's when I said in the beginning of the interview, I don't think this should be a question anymore, because I'm tired of this exclusivity. Not that I don't think
Right.
that there are people that we're drawn to, and that we have some. My friend Carol Howard Merritt, she's a Presbyterian minister. She uses the term "we have our tribe,"
Hmm.
and that's fine. But I don't think that tribe has to be exclusive,
Yeah.
and that it should always be moldable and changeable, as the text tells us that in Scripture, that God is the potter and we are the clay. That means that we're always being continuously molded into something different. And when we stop allowing God to do that, I think then we just kind of become, for lack of a better term, an empty, crusty vessel.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that, to go with that analogy, and I think both sides are guilty of that.
Oh, I would agree. And to extend that analogy even further, I would say that what happens to make us hard and crusty is we get solidified in our own ego.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
it's our ideas and what makes us feel good about who we are is what kind of makes that inflexible.
Hmm.
Whereas being open to God's way takes us beyond our ego, takes us outside of ourselves.
I just want to end this portion of the conversation with this. I had a friend recently say she is a part of a learning community that is very progressive here, and especially in the Southwest, that is open and affirming. Uh, but she recently said that we within the queer community have reversed closeted straight people, because people are afraid to own their own sexuality in this
Mm-hmm.
place that we're at, because We've made them afraid to be straight, that they
Mm-hmm.
don't feel like they're welcomed in this space. And the pendulum has gone too far the other way, and instead of
Mm-hmm.
being an open and inviting space for whether you're gay, straight, questioning, bisexual, whatever, that it can be a safe place for all of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I just thought that was very profound. And if if I had come into there, and I may have been able to say this since I've had some interaction with this learning community, but I thought it was very powerful coming from her, who is very much rooted into that community, that learning
Mm-hmm.
community, and who is bisexual herself. And she kind of, threw the grenade in the room and blew it up. And I thought that was amazing that she
Yeah.
said that.
And frequently within the queer community, you even see those divides between
Oh, yeah.
gay versus trans versus bi and that sort of thing. Let me ask you this question and then we can wrap up.
Okay.
And I guess I'm not sure how to word it, but can we bring Jesus into the conversation? What do you think Jesus' stance would be on structuring the church in a way that is open and affirming?
I think he would have handled it like he handled many other things. I mean, if this was a relevant conversation, which to a certain degree I'm sure it was, but we just don't see it in Scripture. But if it was in first century Palestine, that um, he would have opened his arms and said, I love you. This table is wide open, and as long as you're not being shitty to one another, you're welcome to this table. We have a saying, we open every worship gathering at the Eucatastrophe with this. We only have two rules. You don't have to be anything that you're not, and don't be shitty to one another. And that sounds easy, but if you are a shitty person, and you are oppressive and shitty, and that really calls into question who you are, and it calls for transformation. And I think that
Yeah.
that is at the root of who Jesus and Jesus' message is and was, that we are to love God with everything that we are and love our neighbor as ourselves. So we end every worship gathering. So we had, you don't have to be anything you don't want to be, and don't be shitty to one another. And then we end every worship gathering with this: love the Creator, love the creation, and embrace beauty. And I think that that is at the ethos of Jesus' message. And it still is today.
Yeah.
And I think that's relevant. It was relevant in the first century, and it's relevant in the 21st century. To go back to one of your previous questions, you asked me, why do we hold on to the exclusion of the queer community in our churches? To dig into that a little bit deeper, is because I don't think we know how to love ourselves. And Jesus called us to love our neighbor as ourselves. Well, we have to learn to be okay with ourselves first, and to love ourselves as God loved us, and then we can love our neighbor. So
Easier said than done.
so if you are busy pointing out everybody else's faults, which again, I do not think it is a sin or a fault to be queer, but if you are in that stance where you do, and you're busy pointing out everybody else's crap, that you're not looking at your own self and trying to figure out what it means to love yourself, um, it is easier to cling on to something we can demonize.
Yeah.
For the longest time, with at least the church that I grew up in, the Baptist church, the Southern Baptist church, it was divorce for such a long time. Now everybody in the world now is divorced or whatnot, so they couldn't demonize anymore, and so they've had to find something else to demonize to rally around.
Yeah.
And I think that is so counter what Jesus' message is and was.
Yeah. Okay, well, that ends it up for today, but thank you again for your time, Phil. I really appreciate it. And I
Absolutely.
know that a lot of my really going to appreciate what it is that you have to say,
Thank
because
you.
so often, just as a side note, the reason I've begun including the faith part on my business cards and my website and as part of what I offer people is because as a therapist, so much of what walked in my door was shame and
Mm-hmm.
guilt and family divisions based on this alleged schism
Mm-hmm.
between being queer and loving God. And so my mission is to help people put those two together.
And I
And you've
think
certainly helped me out with that
And I
today. So I
think that's
appreciate it.
amazing what you want to do. And anybody who's listening to this that is queer and is a person of faith, if you hear nothing else in this interview, just know that God loves you. And I think Jesus loves you. And that there are safe spaces for you to live into your sexuality and be the person who God has created you to be, and that you don't have to
Absolutely.
live in shame and be that person.
Yeah. Absolutely. And one last thing, Phil, is can you let our listeners and watchers know where they can learn more about your church and your work?
Yes, you can go to philshepard.com, and that's PhilShepHerd.com. That's my main website. You can find out just kind of my background, some of the projects that I've been working on. You can also go to the Huffington Post and type in Whiskey Preacher. You can find the articles I've done there, and you can go to Patheos, and that's PATHEOS.com, and put in Whiskey Preacher as well, and you can find my stuff there. If you want to hit me up on Twitter, at Phil Shepard. I was one of the first adopters, I guess, of Twitter, so I actually got to have my own name. And if you go to Facebook, you just type in Whiskey Preacher as well, and you can find me there.
Awesome. Thanks again.
Thanks again for having me, and I really appreciate Intersections and what you're doing.
Thanks.